When it comes to big video game series, typically you can at least recognize most of the mainline games that are released. But what happens when a very, very popular game series that most people usually know about has like a really obscure game that nobody has heard about? This is the topic for today, and it gets really, really weird. Like, for example, the first game that inspired this entire video that I had no idea was something that was in development for a little while was Borderlands Online. This was a Chinese exclusive Borderlands MMO that would bring the gameplay from Borderlands into an MMO format that would be released and then supported to the Chinese market. Development started all the way back in 2014 from the studio known as Shanda Interactive Entertainment, who was collaborating with 2K China and Gearbox. And maybe this game aimed to become one of the biggest first-person shooter MMO games out there. What was the competition back then? Destiny 1, which wasn't even on PC. There were 4 different classes you would pick: Siren Soldier, Berserker, and Hunter. There would have been returning NPCs from Borderlands. There was locations that would come back like Skagagully, Tombstone, and it looked like there was also plans for some PvP modes, which would have been really interesting. And while the game was set up to target the Chinese market, I'd like to believe that if it was successful, it would have eventually had a global release. However, while there was some closed beta testing happening in 2015, by the end of the year, Borderlands Online ended up getting canceled when Take-Two Interactive shut down 2K China, mostly citing profitability concerns. So while the game was having internal testing done, it never actually reached a public release or broader access to players. And that was kind of it. There wasn't anything going on, and the game would have just been a footnote in a canceled games video or something. Now, this isn't where the story ends, but first, as the famous musician Pitbull once said, ask for money and get advice. Ask for advice, get money twice. Luke and I decided to take that to heart, and this video has a sponsor. So let's talk about today's sponsor, Fume. Now, lately I've been trying to break some bad habits, and for me, it's been just getting healthy in general, like not eating a ton of really bad food and doing other things like exercising and stuff, and it's been going pretty well. But I will say, changing in general isn't easy at all, but sometimes you just gotta replace not the best stuff with better stuff, and those little changes really do pile up and make a difference. And for some of you, a sponsor like Fume is actually a really good alternative because it's not a vape, it's not an e-cig, and it's not like something about chemicals. It's just a flavored air device. There's no vapor, no nicotine, just natural flavors. So instead of bringing smoke or vapor into your lungs, you're just like drawing natural plant-based flavor through your mouth. This could be a great option to give you something satisfying to reach for when you have an urge or something. And the design's pretty sleek and portable, and you can kind of fidget with it. It has these like magnetic clicks and twists that are super satisfying, which keeps your hands busy while your brain like refocuses on other things. Fume also has a variety of flavors like spearmint ice, cinnamon hearts, or black licorice. There's truly something for every taste preference, and over 500,000 people have already added Fume to their daily routine. And right now, if you grab the Journey Pack at tryfume.com/RocketSloth and use our code RocketSloth, you'll get a free Fume topper to take it to the next level. So if you've been thinking about swapping out a bad habit for something better, Fume is a simple, natural way to do it. Now let's get back to the video. It gets a little more interesting more recently when we look to this year. Back in May of 2025, when Borderlands YouTuber Epic NNG and his buddy Lewis decided to do a deep dive online and go through various Chinese websites and try to translate stuff, trying to find old websites that might have shared one of those early builds for the game somewhere. And believe it or not, despite websites being very virus-filled, they actually found a working link that allowed them to download, at least to start, the client for Borderlands Online. There were still a lot of roadblocks ahead though, because without servers or login credentials and all of that, getting access to the game would have been close to impossible, right? Epic NNG uploaded a video showcasing this whole process and launching kind of a community-driven restoration project to try to revive this game potentially. But they'd have to crack into the game. They could take the files and port them into like a different engine or something, or use an engine tool to try to like reverse engineer their way into the game. At least at first they got to see the character creator section. Nonetheless, by July, the team working on this resurrection project actually managed to get into the game. And at least we can get a little idea of what this game could have potentially been like. Matter of fact, in the game files, there's a recreated map of Dust 2 from Counter-Strike. Okay, why not? It was probably just to test the map, but I think that's funny. play. And as of currently, in September when we're recording this, it seems like more progress has been made over on the side that Epic NNG has been working on. They're able to explore parts of the game now, which is really, really cool. And they're apparently in the process of getting missions, combat, and more things working. But obviously, there's a massive task ahead of them, because if this was like an easy undertaking, I'm pretty sure the game would have released. And I think the main purpose here is to preserve this game for historical reasons. I think it's pretty cool that despite this being a huge, huge task that could take years and years, they're still going to chip away at it, even if it's a long process before maybe this is something people would be able to play and experience. This is definitely a tricky situation, because while it might be easier to make faster progress if the progress that Epic NNG and his team had made would just be like released to the public for anyone to crack into and start working on. But at the same time, there's a little issue where they kind of have to pay attention to what's going on with like copyright laws. No one's looking to get sued here by a massive corporation, that's for sure. So I understand hesitation before just being like, I'm dropping everything we got, all of these assets from an unreleased game for anyone to look at. There's definitely like a tightrope you have to walk on here. Now, Epic NNG in his initial video that he made all the way back in May did say in the video that if anyone at 2K or Gearbox or anything had a problem with this even being shown, he'd take the video down, no questions asked. And the video is still up, so I'd like to think they don't care. I mean, this is a cool project. I don't think it would ever get to the point where it was a full-on running MMO that was like supported just by the community for years and years at the level of what a regular MMO needs, because that's really expensive. But if this could even get to the point where it's playable and people can experience it and walk through what this game could have been, that's a big win in itself. Who knows? Maybe this could serve as like a jumping point for a real Borderlands MMO to come out down the road. If Borderlands 4 is good, of course. Who knows? Nonetheless, I know this one's a little bit out there and it's a little different because it's an unreleased game, but I still wanted to talk about it because we haven't talked about Borderlands Online in a video before. And there's a lot of other really, really weird games that we're going to talk about in this video. But after this video is done, if you thought the Borderlands section of this video was interesting, do go check out Epic NNG's video on this same topic. Or alternatively, you could check out our video we did on unreleased games that you weren't supposed to be able to play, but now you totally can go and play, because this game is not talked about in there. But there are other games historically that have popped up over the years that are interesting. That being said, let's talk about the next game. Believe it or not, Counter-Strike actually has a couple of obscure games that I feel like deserve to be on this list. Counter-Strike Nexon comes to mind first, though some people might remember this one. This was interesting. It was Counter-Strike, but it was run by a different company, Nexon Corporation, and it released in Western countries, which was not to be expected with this game. And while the most part it's just Counter-Strike, there was a zombies mode, and that was probably the biggest draw for people in the West to play this instead of regular like CSGO. But interestingly enough, Nexon had previously released a game exclusively in China called Counter-Strike Online, which was a spin-off to the Counter-Strike series, which this time around was targeting Asian markets. It was developed by the South Korean company Nexon here, and it used the Gold Source engine. Now, this game was all the way back in 2008, so it's like pre-CSGO era. So I guess if we're talking about Counter-Strike Nexon, which we were with the zombies mode and all that, we back up the clock a little bit to 2008 and we can look at Counter-Strike Online. And it's pretty much just like Counter-Strike. It uses the assets from Condition Zero. But what I find really funny is that while Counter-Strike 2 recently, I guess somewhat recently, released or got that update from CSGO and now it's just called Counter-Strike 2, there technically was already a Counter-Strike 2 years before that in the form of Counter-Strike Online 2, which was a sequel to this game that we're talking about here, which released in 2013, still by Nexon. Now, interestingly enough, Counter-Strike Online 2 didn't use Global Offensive as a base for what they were going to fork their game into, despite the fact that this came out a year after Global Offensive came out. They actually used Counter-Strike Source as the base, but they took ideas that were cut content from Counter-Strike Global Offensive and then absorbed those ideas into Counter-Strike Online 2. So, for instance, at one point during CSGO's development, character customization was supposed to be a thing, and that didn't make it in, but that idea did make it into CSO2. So that's about it. I think in general with a lot of games, they get like a Chinese version of the game that's different and maybe has a different title, or it's an online service differently than how we get it in the West. Most of the time, the core game is pretty similar. There's just like a lot of differences with how the UI is handled and cosmetics. And we've talked about that before in the censorship in China games video that we did a while back. So it's always interesting to see this, but I just think it's funny that there's a Counter-Strike Online 2 that released in 2012, 2013. But I'm pretty sure this game ended up being the baseline for Counter-Strike Nexon, which eventually the West did end up getting. And it had that zombies mode. And then even more obscure, I would say Counter-Strike Neo probably fits the bill, but we've talked about that already in an existing video, so we don't really need to dive into it too much. But it was a Japanese arcade version of Counter-Strike that was essentially a modified version of the game that had unique maps, interesting cosmetics for characters, and it had some like anime stuff going on because of Japan. I don't know, pretty cool stuff here.
Battlefield also had a couple of games that are less known and that I kind of forgot about existed as well. In 2010, EA tried entering the market with Battlefield in South Korea, and they released a game called Battlefield Online that was developed by Neowitz Games in partnership with EA and DICE. This was a free-to-play modernized remake of Battlefield 2, and while it retained the core large-scale combat, it was a live service game designed for a completely different market, which was quite a departure from the regular $60 boxed game release. This game used a modified version of the Refractor Engine 2, which was the same engine for Battlefield 2142, but with updated graphics and gameplay elements. It did focus on a smaller number of players per match, which was also another departure. With it being a regional exclusive, it was really hard to play this in the West in 2010. You know, you could use VPNs, maybe play it, but back then it was kind of hard. But the game is no longer playable anyways, because in 2013 they would shut down the servers. But even before that, there's another Battlefield title that is oft-forgotten, and that is Battlefield Heroes. This was an in-browser game that was completely free to play as well. It featured like a stylized cartoonish art style, and it definitely looked very different than the normal realistic visuals of the main series. This game was more casual and a third-person shooter as well, with a completely different progression system that felt more like an RPG. This was also built on that Refractor 2 game engine that Battlefield 2142 used, and was actually received pretty positively. I remember playing this back in the day, and I did like it a lot. Played it on my crappy computer, and it ran pretty well. It did have microtransactions, which, you know, back then were kind of more controversial than they are nowadays, so a lot of people did not like that. In 2015, though, they would shut down Battlefield Heroes, and there's actually another forgotten Battlefield title they would shut down at the same time called Battlefield Play for Free. This released in 2011 for PC, and this was a worldwide release, and this was the same thing as Battlefield Online essentially, but it borrowed some elements from Battlefield Heroes. Now, for some reason, this game was built on a modified version of Battlefield 2 game engine and was received kind of meh. Battlefield Play Free, as I said, shut down at the same time of Battlefield Heroes in 2015. But EA wasn't only trying to enter the free-play PC market in the early 2010s, they were also trying to enter the mobile game market, and they released Battlefield Bad Company 2 for iOS in 2010. Now, this was a mobile-specific version that was like a different version than the Bad Company would get on console. This featured a scaled-down single-player campaign and a dedicated multiplayer component that only featured up 10 players at a time, though. They also cut down the single-player missions to 14. This was priced at 99 cents from what I find, which is not that crazy of a price, I guess. I mean, you know, compared to the $60 you'd have to pay for the full version on your console. And at the time, the news outlets were kind of praising it for being a cool FPS experience on the mobile device, which were scarce at time, but honestly, it was not as good as just the regular Battlefield Bad Company 2. And eventually, they would pull this game from the App Store. You were no longer able to purchase it or download it, and the servers also have been shut down, making it unplayable. They would try with Battlefield 3 again, with Battlefield 3 Aftershock. This time was a free-to-play mobile game released in 2012, but this time they wouldn't even include a campaign. It was just a stripped-down version of the multiplayer. It was very limited in its feature and was kind of criticized being that, and it felt more like a marketing thing, just like a promotional companion. Battlefield 3, it really wasn't that great of a game. And this negative feedback actually made EA remove the game from the App Store less than a month after its release, so there was not a lot of time that could experience this, and that's why it's often very forgotten, actually.
You know, back when I was in college getting my degree for English, I thought it'd be cool to go back and try to play most, if not all, of the original Legend of Zelda games, just to see what it was like. But man, booting up the first Legend of Zelda game on the NES was not as fun of an experience as I thought it would be, because most of the time I had no idea what I was doing, and I found myself just having to look up a guide on how to do things. After a while, I lost interest, probably because of my short attention span. And I totally get, when this game came out, this is what you had. You figured it out. You cooked and you worked your way through, and that was part of the experience. For what I was wanting to do, I just wanted to play Ocarina of Time again, and I wanted an excuse to get to that point. So I thought if I played every game up to that, I could justify playing it again. What I'm trying to say is that the original Legend of Zelda game was a great game, but it definitely wasn't a modernized game at all. But what if I were to tell you there was a remake to this game that most people haven't played? We're talking about Zelda no Densetsu. Now check this out. This was a Legend of Zelda remake that was made in the Super Nintendo's A Link to the Past's engine, with the caveat that you had to use the Super Nintendo's broadcast satellite system known as Satellaview. It was a 1995 Japan-only service that was an add-on for the Super Famicom that would connect your Super Nintendo to the ST Giga satellite radio service, and from there you could download magazines, look at some other things, and download games. In the 90s, it had this special cartridge that was a rewritable flash cartridge known as the Broadcast System X cartridge, and for the 90s this thing wasn't cheap. It was 14,000 yen for the service itself, which was about 140 USD in hardware costs, and then there were service fees on top of that ranging from probably like $6 to $20, and then of course you had to have like the satellite hookup stuff, being able to connect and all that. But there were exclusive games released on there, one of them being Zelda no Densetsu, which was the remake using the Link to the Past engine, and it released episodically, which I think is really interesting instead of just being able to be released all at once. But then, if I'm understanding this correctly, it gets a lot weirder with the whole way that the system worked. If you wanted to download a game, for example, you had to literally log in at the set time that was provided on the schedule, and during that time, the satellite would beam down the data for the games, and I think the download wasn't permanent, and the broadcast would rotate and rewrite and overwrite old data. Some of the games that were released through this process also would use live audio that was broadcasted through the television, which would add voice acting to some things, which was like unheard of during the Super Nintendo era pretty much. And there were like timed events that would happen, like characters receiving power-ups or enemies maybe being stronger at different times. And on top of that, because of the way that the broadcast worked, you had to play the game in one sitting, and you only had about 1 hour every week to play. Now, some of the dungeons had different layouts, which is kind of interesting. And there were some nuanced things that were different between this game and the original game, obviously, besides just the aesthetic. And originally, the game let you have custom avatars for this as well, because it connected to like the Giga system or whatever. So they made it stand out a little bit. You weren't playing necessarily as Link here. There were male and female options for characters. And while I think this is already really obscure, things get even more obscure when we look at the Satellaview or Satellaview, because there was a follow-up game that was a completely brand new Legend of Zelda title known as The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets that was released through the same system. Once again, it used the engine from A Link to the Past, but this time around the story actually takes place a couple of years after A Link to the Past, making this, in a way, the first sequel to A Link to the Past. It released in 1997 here. But don't get the wrong idea. While it did reuse some assets from A Link to the Past, it had its own original story, its own dungeons, its own side quests. But in this game, Link is completely not in this game at all. This one exclusively used the whole avatar system. You still only had 1 hour to play, and interestingly enough, while there were 4 episodes for this game, the broadcasts of it were pretty limited. And while doing research for this, I found a lot of sources saying that it would only be available 1 time a week, just like the previous Zelda. It is a little confusing because the broadcast times show like 1 week periods. So I want to say maybe it was playable multiple days in a 1 week window for the 1 hour limit, but I'm not 100% sure. What I can see is that there were 4 episodes, and it seemed like each episode at least had 2 other reruns after its initial broadcast. So perhaps you only had 3 potential windows to play each episode across the year. In total, 3, 6, 9, 12 total broadcasts, maybe, or 12 windows of time where you could play each section of the game in total. So you would have had to have been pretty punctual to make sure that you were playing part 1 during the 3 times available, part 2 during the 3 times available, and so on and so forth. And then allegedly, if you got a high score, you could submit it to Nintendo and win real life prizes, but I couldn't figure out what those real life prizes were, so I don't know. But yeah, the Zelda fandom wiki has a lot of info on there, which is kind of cool. Now, fortunately, the ROMs of these had been dumped, so there are ways to go back and experience these nowadays, though I don't think Nintendo considers these canon, and I don't think they've ever acknowledged their existence after they originally had their run. Matter of fact, the broadcast satellite series of games didn't really last all that long. While it initially launched in 1995, by 1997 and 1998, it seemed like Nintendo was already reducing its support for the project, and then they completely withdrew withdrew from the project by 2000, which kind of wrapped up everything. Some of the services continued to run through the beginning of 2001, but eventually they just ended it there. A 6-year run. Not the worst, but kind of niche and forgotten about. Also, an honorable mention, though, has to go to the F-Zero Grand Prix game that was released here as well. It was like a remixed version of F-Zero, but it had some interesting things despite being released in 4 different parts. Like it had announcer commentary, but while the original F-Zero game only had 3 different cups, this game had a 4th cup that had brand new courses. There were some new vehicles as well, exclusive here, and then there was a follow-up sequel type version to this game that released called F-Zero Grand Prix 2, and it also had some new maps like Mute City 4. Neat. I mean, I think it's cool though that originally if you were playing like F-Zero Grand Prix when they did the whole thing and you were playing during the right time, the broadcast would start, it would beam you the game, and you'd play like courses that you probably were already familiar with from F-Zero, but then the last track of the broadcast was an exclusive map that you were experiencing for the first time. I bet you it was one of those really cool you had to be there type of moments.
You guys remember when Xbox made a big deal about Crossfire X? They announced the game as like their take on the Counter-Strike genre, and they even had Remedy Entertainment develop not 1, but 2 single-player campaigns for this. And after a little bit of struggle during development, the game would eventually release in 2022 to kind of mixed reception. It was kind of bad. We played it a little bit and it wasn't good. And that caused them to shut down the game a little over a year after its release in May of 2023. And while I maybe could count this game as a forgotten game, I feel like it's too recent to count. But there's another Crossfire game from recent years that probably not a lot of people actually know about, and that is Crossfire Warzone. This was a mobile game that released in 2020 for iOS and Android. It was published by Joy City, a company known for other mobile strategy games like Pirates of the Caribbean, Tides of War. And that kind of gives away what the departure was for this from the regular FPS-style Crossfire gameplay. This was a real-time strategy base-building mobile game tied to the Crossfire IP. It had like a very basic gacha system that featured a roster of 25 unique heroes that you could unlock. They did have some very short FPS segments, if you can even call that, where you like snipe stuff or you fight off a horde of zombies, but it was just like a mini game. It wasn't really the main gameplay. Reception was actually leaning towards positive. It was fine for a mobile title. It was pretty much just like the other mobile titles, and people who enjoy that kind of like this. Yeah, I mean, they like the management system and the way it worked, but obviously it wasn't an FPS game, which regular Crossfire fans probably weren't too interested in. And that was kind of the reason why it is forgotten, because it only took them 2 years before they shut it down and removed it from the App Store, and you can no longer play it.
Luke, remember when we did Halo videos?
We did?
Did you forget? Remember how we flew to New York City just so we could play that Halo game, Fireteam Raven?
I do remember, and I got sick and had to sit on the streets of New York.
Yeah. Wild times. And it was weird because Fireteam Raven isn't the game we're talking about, but that game in itself is a good like setup here because it is like an on-rail shooter game that used assets from Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, but then tried to do its own thing. And while that felt pretty foreign for a Halo game, other game series had been doing it for a little bit longer, and one more obscure one comes from the Silent Hill franchise. We're talking about Silent Hill, the arcade. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I did not. And actually, I've played quite a bit of Silent Hill games, so that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, so this was released apparently in Japan, Europe, and Australia across 2007, 2008. I don't think there was ever an official release in North America. I'm sure the arcade cabinet eventually made its way here. Like, I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure you can buy it on eBay, right? Like everything.
Probably, yeah, like get it imported or something. Or I'm sure someone could like flash it onto custom. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But I mean, you know, when you buy the old arcade, you want the design of the arcade, not necessarily the games on it.
Right. So this is interesting because this game reuses assets and elements from other Silent Hill games. So it takes stuff from Silent Hill 4, The Room. I don't even know what that is. Is that the subtitle for Silent Hill 4? Is that like a spinoff? Is that just the official subtitle? Silent Hill 4, The Room.
The Room. Yeah.
I never realized, dude, I don't know much about Silent Hill. You're going to be the Silent Hill expert on these.
They definitely, I don't know, after Silent Hill 3, they become so I don't know.
Okay, it takes stuff from Silent Hill 3, Silent Hill 2 as well. And it also like uses some of the monsters, music, and some locations. But unlike the horror games that Silent Hill games are, these were surprisingly enough on-rail shooters, which I feel like changes up the entire vibe of a Silent Hill game.
It definitely... On-rail shooters are not scary at all. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, you just shoot. Like, it's nothing scary if the main protagonist can shoot. Imagine the movie Annabelle
And like everybody had like AR-15s, like you just pop that doll and like it'd be over. Like, I don't know.
I mean, you're not wrong. I do have to say, some of the images of things that are in the game and some of the gameplay footage I've watched of this, there are some like spooky looking things. So like the vibe is at least creepy. It seems like there was also like kind of a deep story, which was surprising for an arcade game. And there were also like a couple of different endings that you could get depending on what choices you made throughout the game, which is kind of weird for a campaign. There's like at least 4 different endings. One of them's like a goofy joke ending, and then there's like a good ending, normal ending, and a bad ending.
Actually, I do think I know what the story is based off. So in Silent Hill 2, you can find like a note about like the steamship that sunk called like the Little Baroness, and the arcade, I think it expands on that.
That's kind of cool.
Did you know there was a free-to-play MMO-style Need for Speed game made specifically for the Chinese and Korean market called Need for Speed Edge? Well, I didn't know about this either, but yeah, this released and was a real thing that launched in 2017. This was developed by EA Spearhead, formerly known as EA Korea, in partnership with Nexon and Tencent. Obviously, this being a free-to-play online-only MMO was very different from the other Need for Speed titles, which were mostly single-player games at the time. Now, Need for Speed Edge was a live service game and focused on online racing, though there was a small single-player portion to it. Interestingly enough, the PC version of this game was based on the 2013 title Need for Speed Rivals, while the mobile version, sometimes also called Need for Speed Duel, is based on Need for Speed No Limits. Nonetheless, apparently, this game had a very large and unique car list, including cars that you wouldn't usually see in a Need for Speed title. Now, the actual reception for the game was kind of mixed. Visually, the game looked good and was powered by the Frostbite engine, which at the time was a pretty powerful engine, but gameplay itself was very repetitive, and there was a vague pay-to-win structure that often restricted players from progressing unless they paid. And regular Need for Speed fans who were used to the single-player campaign style were kind of like burned by this too, because the single-player component was very weak and very minor. Now, 2 years after launch in 2019, the game was actually officially shut down. The reason that was cited for this was that the player interest just wasn't there, and that was the cause for the demise of Need for Speed Edge. Apparently at some point there were plans to release this globally if it would have taken off on the Asian market, but with that not happening, all plans for that were also scrapped.
Hey Luke, I have a question.
Yeah?
Would you say you've played most Mario games?
Yeah. I mean...
So at least if you haven't played every Mario game, would you say that you at least probably have heard of every Mario game more or less?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know like the more obscure ones, like Mario is Missing, for example? I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
When it comes to like Mario games, even the more obscure ones are known about. But there's one Mario game that was developed and published by Nintendo for their mainline system in the 90s that I swear I've never heard anybody talk about before. Have you ever heard of Mario Clash?
No. Is that like Clash of Clans?
No. It's not like the Rainbow Six operator either. So this is interesting because people know about the very obscure Mario games, even the bad Mario games like that weren't even involving really Nintendo's oversight or anything. But then there's a Mario game that Nintendo literally published and developed themselves that I feel like never gets talked about, at least in YouTube videos. And I think the reason why nobody talks about it is because it released on the 1995 Virtual Boy. But to be fair, the Virtual Boy was Nintendo's like flagship console for a very short period of time. They were trying to get it off the ground and they needed a Mario game. So what better than Mario Clash? I don't know. Do you feel like this one counts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about it. Also, like, what, the Virtual Boy existed for like, did it even make it to a year? Like before it got discontinued? I don't even think so. So like...
I feel like it did. It made it 1 year. It was discontinued at third quarter of 96 in North America.
Okay, but it came out third quarter of 95, so maybe just about a year.
About a year, yeah.
So obviously, I don't know, the Mario games on there, the mainline Mario game, I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say Mario Clash. I don't even know what the cover would look like.
Right. So to be fair, Mario Clash also is just a reimagining of the original Mario Bros. Arcade game for the Virtual Boy. So it has like that red tint to it. The game was just originally developed as a straight up remake of the original arcade game, but then they kind of like evolved it a little bit. It was originally just supposed to be called Mario Bros. VB, and then they decided, no, we're going to call it Mario Clash for the Virtual Boy. And the reception wasn't really the best for a Nintendo Mario game. Kind of landed very middle of the road, like 75%, 3 out of 5, stuff like that.
You remember Screw Attack?
Yeah.
They said it was the second worst Mario game of all time.
What was the worst?
Hotel Mario.
It would have been that or Mario was missing, I feel like. So, but yeah, no, I just think Virtual Boy games in general are forgotten about. But Mario Clash, like you never hear anyone talk about that.
Can I make confession real quick? I never played Mario Odyssey.
You never played Mario Odyssey?
No, I kind of skipped it. I don't know.
How?
I don't
Why
know.
did you even buy a Switch then?
For Zelda?
Okay, and then after you played Zelda, what did you do for the next 7 years?
Nothing.
Do you know if you play Mario Odyssey on the Switch 2, you get like the faster frame rate?
I know. I mean, I still want to play it. I mean, I played the ones afterwards. I played Mario Wonder and stuff. I just skipped Odyssey for some reason. I don't know.
That's so weird.
Okay, Elijah, what do you know about Dynasty Warriors?
I don't know. Didn't they do a spin-off that had Zelda characters?
I mean, hey, that is true though.
That's my extent. I've seen the trailer for Hyrule Warriors before.
Okay, so let me fill you in. Basically, the whole concept is you're one person in the main line, right? You're like one person from like history. You fight like a horde of people, right? Like ba 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 ba. And that's the premise of it.
The sound effects help.
And usually it's a single player game. But in 2006, in Japan, they launched a game called Dynasty Warriors Online, which was a free-to-play MMORPG that would also make its way to the West 4 years later
For PC, but in Japan, it would also release on the PlayStation 3.
and then eventually the PlayStation 4 and the PS Vita. So it did make its way around quite a bit and was able to be played for a while. Now, fun fact, this game originally actually launched under the name Dynasty Warriors Broadband. Broadband, like the internet. They just put the title in there. A year into the release, they were like, this is a stupid name, let's change it. So this is just a classic MMO. You make your character, and then, you run around the world, you fight people, you fight like NPCs and stuff, like you do quests and stuff.
But the main part was actually centered around PvP. Like 99% of the gameplay was you loading into a PvP lobby and then fighting NPCs and other players at the same time.
But they did keep the element of like the horde of people coming at you. It's just a little weird sometimes because there's other people also attracting hordes. I don't know. It's like a weird concept. It doesn't fully work. And the game actually was received like mixed by fans. Obviously, it changes the gameplay up quite a bit. So the fans of Dynasty Warriors were kind of like, eh. And also apparently there was some pay to win stuff where you could just like get better gear with money, which I mean, that's never fun.
Especially because it's so PvP heavy.
A lot of people were like, oh, this is just a cash grab. In the West, it would actually shut down in 2014, just 4 years after it released here. In Japan, though, it did make it all the way until 2022, just shut down 3 years ago. And up until then, it was officially playable. Do you remember how on the Wii, you could buy WiiWare games? There was like a dedicated shop where like games would specifically release for this, right?
Yeah, can we talk real quick about how awesome the WiiWare section was for Virtual Console, though?
Oh, yeah.
Did that count as WiiWare? Because, like, they just priced everything across the board exactly the same based on the console. So if you wanted, like, an old game, all things on, like, the NES, I think, were $5. And then, like, I want to say the N64 games were all $10. Doesn't matter if it was a good game or a bad game, $10.
I think the Game Boy games were $10 too, right? Like the Game Boy Advance games?
I don't remember. I stopped using my Wii before the Game Boy Advance came out on there.
No, I do still buy a Game Boy Advance game on there. Anyways, yeah, so there was a great system, right? There were some good games in there, like classics, but also new games were made for there. And one of those was Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles My Life as King. Now, this came out in 2008 and was actually a launch title for the WiiWare shop in Japan. And it was available for 1,500 Wii points. Remember when you could buy Wii points back in the day?
Dude, I used to buy those all the time. I actually was like, stupid side tangent. I bought the original classic controller before they had like the updated, better classic controller that would plug into the Wii thing, and it was rough. But I used it.
Dude, actually, I had some weird gadgets. Do you remember was it Animal Crossing that came with like the microphone or some shit?
Oh yeah. And it sounded awful.
Yeah,
there
yeah.
was the rackets that you could get and like the bat and the stuff for Wii Sports that didn't do anything.
Oh, I actually have those for the Switch, dude.
Why?
I just saw them for like $5 at TJ Maxx, and I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. And then I played with them, and I swung so hard that like the thing just broke on my swing.
Wait, do you even have Switch Sports?
Yeah.
And you haven't played with me?
Oh, I didn't buy it on launch, but eventually I bought it, maybe.
But I bought it at launch, so I've had it this whole time.
This year when I bought it, like a couple months ago.
I was playing it like a month ago.
No way.
Yes.
Okay, we should play it then. Can we play golf online? I haven't played golf yet.
Yeah, it's like remember I was explaining to you how it's like a battle royale? They do the like eliminations. Same with
I
bowling.
do remember that, yeah.
We've had a conversation
Yeah,
about
we definitely
this.
did.
playing Wii Sports, Switch Sports without me.
Anyways, we're getting off track. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles My Life as a King released for the WiiWare. Now, Final Fantasy usually is a turn-based game, but this was a like city management / city building game with like a little bit of story tied to it. Obviously a big departure from Final Fantasy. Though, apparently, people did really like this game, and it sold so well that it would actually get a sequel in 2009, just a year later, called Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles My Life as a Dark Lord. This was another genre shift because now it was a tower defense game. Kind of weird. But both of these games did also have a lot of microtransactions, and that included like some stuff that was kind of like advancing you quicker. Like you could just buy the buildings instead of grinding for them. And for the tower defense game, you could just buy the upgrades instead of grinding for them. So, I mean, it's a single player game, so it's not really pay to win, but it's just pay to speed up. I don't know. But both of these games vanished when the Wii shop shut down in 2019, which makes them not playable anymore. And I don't think a lot of people know about them because, you know, it's been 16 years since the second one came out. So, I mean, obviously you can emulate it, but that's illegal. I would never do that.
That's a crazy name, though. Like, My Life as a Blank is in itself a crazy subtitle, especially for a Final Fantasy game. A spin-off Final Fantasy game. Or spin-off of a spin-off, right? Because, like, isn't Crystal Chronicles already a spin-off?
I think so. It's like the chibi style, right? Yeah.
Right, and then it's a spin-off of that? That's deep.
It's very deep, dude. Also, My Life as a Dark Lord sounds like crazier than My Life as a King too. Like,
what year was this?
2009.
Kind of checks out though.
Why?
2009, dude. Like that was like the edgy emo era, like the 2005 to 2009, dude. Anything in that window. It starts with Shadow the Hedgehog and it ends with like when Fall Out Boy went on hiatus. In the 90s, one of the biggest video game rivalries out there was Nintendo versus Sega. Everybody knows about that, and you would think Nintendo would never let Sega get even remotely close to using something that they had partial ownership over as an IP, right? What if I was to tell you that a console made by Sega in the 90s ended up getting not one, not two, but 3 Pokemon titles for it?
There's no way. That can't be right. I don't believe it.
We're talking about the good old-fashioned Sega Pico. You ever hear about that?
No, that sounds like that eating disease where you just like
the thing cats have that like lick stuff?
Pico or something.
The Sega Pico is an entertainment console or edutainment console. It's kind of like one of those, like, you probably had one like similar to it back in the day. It was like a 90s kids laptop, but it's not really a laptop.
Yeah,
and it has a touch
definitely.
pen, kind of like a Leapfrog or something like that. Sega had their own, and they made little cartridge games for it, but in the early 2000s, and it was, to be fair, after Sega had backed off of making consoles, so the rivalry was over, but these games still released for the Sega Pico, which originally released in 93. So this is like 10 years after its launch, but still compatible apparently. 3 Pokemon edutainment games came out called Pokemon Catch the Numbers, Pokemon Advanced Generation, I've Begun Hiragana and Katakana, and Pokemon Advanced Generation Pico for Everyone Pokemon Loud Battle.
Okay. The first 2, pretty obvious what they are, right? Like some with numbers, some with writing. But what the f is the third one supposed to be about?
There's mini games while catching Pokemon. Whoa, it came with a dedicated controller and allowed 2 players to play simultaneously. There's a lot to unpack in this image. Now, to be fair, these weren't like straight up Pokemon games per se. These were like anime spin-offs. So it wasn't really like, here's the Pokemon games now on Sega. It was more like, here's a tie-in with the TV series on the Sega Pico. So, you know, like in the ones where they're counting numbers, it has like Team Rocket, but like the TV show Team Rocket and Ash, Brock, and Misty. Does this count as Nintendo being like, yeah, go ahead? Probably not. But I feel like it's interesting just to be like, there's a Pokemon game on the Sega Pico. Who would have thought?
There's a successor. They had 4 more Pokemon games.
Is it the Advanced Pico Bina?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like there's 4 more games, yeah. All the way through Black and White. So they did another number battle game in 2005, a letter and number game in 2007, based on Diamond and Pearl,
A puzzle game in 2009, also based on Diamond and Pearl.
and then a Black and White one in 2010. But they dropped the Sega name by then. It was just called the Advanced Pico Bina. Do you think they picked that name to like, because like Game Boy Advance was a thing? And they're like, ooh, you know, they won't know the difference if it's called the Advanced Pico Bina.
When did Sega drop out of the console business, though?
Around 2002?
Yeah, so this must have been after, right? Probably.
Advanced was 2005, yeah.
Yeah, so that I mean, they probably were.
But it was a different department of Sega. It was called Sega Toys. I don't know whatever happened to Sega Toys. I'm assuming they merged with Sammy.
They went defunct in 2024.
Oh, no. Sega Toys and Sega's amusement business, the ones that do the arcades, combined together and were renamed. So I think they took Sega toys, they took the amusement, pushed them together, and now they are Sega Fave. The more you know.
Okay, another game that not a lot of people probably know about is Contra Returns, because this was a Chinese mobile game that released in 2017. This was developed by Konami and Tencent in collaboration. Compared to the classic Contra games, this is kind of a weird game because of all the microtransactions, which also involve like you upgrading your HP bar. There's no like permadeath, and it's just a weird system for Contra, which is famous for being just a really hard game where you die a lot. It's like Dark Souls before Dark Souls. Now, the game itself features a lot of levels, like over 200 levels, and a lot of characters that you also can pull from a gacha system. And it's not a very faithful adaptation of Contra. And it would eventually come out globally, but that wouldn't last for very long because in 2024, the global version was shut down. And I'm not sure if the Chinese version is still up, but I'm thinking it's also gone. There was another Chinese mobile Contra game, and this one was called Contra Evolution and released in 2010. This was a HD remake of the original Contra game, I think bringing it to China for the first time because I don't think it originally released there. Now, what was weird about this is when you go to the arcade, you play Contra back in the day, right? You pop your quarter in, you die, you have to pop in another quarter. That's how it just worked. Now, they decided for this mobile game in 2010 to keep that feature, and you actually have to pay to continue. There's like an in-game currency called like diamonds, and then if you die, you have to pop in like your virtual quarter, quote unquote. I don't think it was just a quarter, and that was kind of a weird thing. And that game was phased out in 2015, and then eventually Contra Returns came out 2 years later and kind of replaced this as the main Contra mobile game, but just also like a weird thing that I don't think a lot of people know about.
Did you ever play the Postal games?
Yeah, maybe. Like, which is the one where you like put the cat on the gun as the silencer? I played that one.
I don't know. I played very little Postal games, or very little Postal in general. I have one game on my Steam library. Hold on, I'll tell you which one. I bought Postal 2 in 2017, and I played it for 19 minutes.
Nice.
So that's my experience with Postal. Not very in depth. I feel like there's a lot of games out there that I haven't experienced that I probably should. Like, I'm thinking about making a list of games I need to finally sit down and play.
Oh, dude, I've been thinking about that too recently, actually. There's so many single player games I also start and then never finish.
Right. I was like, man, I'm just going to make a list and just start like going through the list of games I need to just at least play through, force myself through, like BioShock. Never played more than 20 to 30 minutes of BioShock. One game that I'll never play is the mobile Postal game that released in 2009. This isn't even the game that I'm talking about, but I just want to use this game as like a setup here because back in 2009 there was a Postal game that's considered non-canon. It's a spin-off, and oddly enough the game played kind of like a top-down game. It kind of reminds me of like those old Grand Theft Auto games maybe, but it's like on a phone.
Is this Java based then? Because it's 2009?
It must be. Is that what J2ME means?
Probably, yeah. Like something like that, yeah.
Probably is Java based. But here's the thing, that isn't the game we're talking about because that game isn't the only Postal game that ever came out on mobile games. There was another game that came out a couple of months earlier called Postal Babes.
Oh!
It is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. There are 2 playable characters. One of them is called the Babe in Black, who uses melee weapons, and then there's the Babe in White, who uses firearms. And that's about it. The game was shut down or made unavailable a long time ago. There was maybe some false advertising in the game because apparently some of the promotional images show tits, and there's no tits in the actual game.
I mean, yeah, but that's also crazy. Like, they're false advertising that. Like, I don't know.
There's like a whole section on how in one of the versions of the game there was the option to see the girls topless.
Awooga.
But you had to send an SMS text message to the publisher, apparently. But it was censored otherwise.
And then they charge you $2.99 a week?
Maybe, but could you imagine? I'm sure someone did it.
Wait, they used to be like, that's how,
the games were. You had to like pay a monthly subscription just to play games on mobile phones, right?
Oh, yes, but I meant like specifically the dirty videos, like they did also have those Jumba things.
Oh, the Jamster stuff?
Yeah, they would have them like late night on television in Europe. Like it was the same kind of ads.
I never engaged with those. Like, could you get like some, like Crazy Frog After Dark type stuff?
Yeah. And I mean, he already has his out in the normal one, so that's how crazy it's gonna get after dark.
Dang. So apparently, though, in the game files, the topless version of the character sprites are in the game and could be modded back into the game, but like that sounds like you're already doing the most work. But somebody thought that was important to include in the trivia section of the Postal Fandom wiki page. So I had to include it because somebody out there cared enough to include that.
I find the topless image.
Not for the video.
No, we're not gonna show the video. You guys can look it up. It's on the.
Don't encourage it. You can't be redirecting people.
Okay, my bad. Okay, so don't look it up on the cutting room floor.
Also, don't forget to check out Fume with our link down below and use our code ROCKETSLOTH so you'll get a free Fume topper if you grab the Journey Pack today. Well, what did you guys think of this video? Did you enjoy it? Did we miss a game that you were like, man, it's so not remembered? It didn't even make it in the not remembered video. Let us know in the comments down below. Also, check out this video on your screen. Thank you to our patrons and our YouTube members for supporting us. We're coming up with something. I haven't talked to Luke about it yet, but I'm coming up with something that I think would be really cool to do for people like that. So hang on. But yeah, if you want to support our show, that's a cool way to help us. Otherwise, just watch our videos or subscribe. That helps too. Make sure you are subscribed. It takes like 2 seconds and it does make a difference. That's it. Okay, we'll see you guys next time with a new video. Bye.